My name is Ishita Srivastav and I'm a capstone researcher. We welcome you all to the 23rd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, India's premium platform for deliberating the discourse around sustainability and climate change. On, on behalf of TERI, I'll just speak a little louder. On behalf, it is my pleasure to MC this thematic track on enhancing planning, institutional frameworks, and capacities on adaptation and resilience, curated by the World Bank. Today's session is being chaired by Mr. J.M. Mosker, sir, who's a former Special Secretary to MOEFCC, and he was a lead climate negotiator for India, amongst other things. We have Dr. Pablo Benestez Pons, Senior Environmental Economist, World Bank, at the dais. Now we invite panelists, including Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi, Head of Environment, Energy, and Resilience, UNDP, on the stage. We invite Dr. Christoph von Stechow, Senior Policy Advisor, BMZ, Regional Department, India. Ms. Zeenat Nazi and Mr. Subhashish Day are on their way, so we'll get back to them. But now we invite Dr. Manish Srivastav, Senior Fellow and Associate Director, Earth Science and Climate Change Division, TERI. We invite Dr. Shelley Kedia, Associate Sustainable Development Summit, amongst us. May we please have a round of applause for our distinguished dignitaries who have joined us for this session today. Before we commence, I would also like to invite our esteemed speakers for a group photograph. If the cameraman can just take a group photograph, please. Can we all just later on? Okay, surely. Moving on, I invite Dr. Pablo Benestez Pons for giving us the welcome remarks and sharing the framing presentation with us today.
Good afternoon, and again, many thanks to TERI for inviting us to be partners in this session. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm living here in New Delhi over the last 2 years, so I get to understand quite a bit what are the climate adaptation challenges here in India. Of course, I have been working in this area before in other regions. I just finished a meeting with the Secretary of Environment, the Minister of Environment, Ms. Lina Nandan. The way she started the conversation is that she really wants the World Bank to focus on adaptation. I think she was telling us, okay, the mitigation, we are in this in a good path, and I understand many sessions, of course, have been discussed mitigation, but of course we see a lot of private sector financing going into mitigation already, which is very good. And while this financing needs to continue, I think she was concerned about financing for adaptation, because she was saying, look, we have been financing adaptation from the national budget, but we need, given the challenges that we're facing, we really need the World Bank to come up with a broader envelope of financing for adaptation. And again, our commitment globally is to, first of all, 45% of our financing goes to climate, with climate benefits. And out of that, at least 50% to be on adaptation, so 50% adaptation of our climate financing. But for India, it was very clear that we need to focus on this. To get started, I just put a couple of pictures, which I was looking at my files, some pictures. And the first one is, this is a road in Quito, Ecuador, the city I was born. And when I was a kid, it was just a path, a walking path, made for cattle, animals, horses. And it was a very narrow, and that was the purpose of it. Then with urbanization, people start to build houses everywhere, right? And then somebody said, oh, we need a road. And then after, it was a nice road, right? But the road was washed away after 2 seasons. And this made the case, was the reason for this? Well, lack of planning, right? People just start to build houses, roads, etc. So lack of planning. And this is very costly because, now the road is gone. It makes no sense to repair it because it was bad planning since the first place. And then the environmental consequences of having that, you can imagine. The second picture, that's the city of Kigali, which is a very nice and clean, beautiful city in Africa, those that have visited the region. But Kigali is surrounded, it has multiple wetland systems. And what they have done in the past, they have used the wetlands for something else, for agriculture, for settlements, etc. So all these encroachment wetlands, every time it rains, it happens this way, right? And it can get even worse. And again, there was lack of planning. People start to use the wetlands for something else. Now the World Bank is providing a loan of 20, $30 million just to restore the wetlands. So you say how expensive it is, you need to start fixing things, and it's not going to be perfect. So this stresses the importance of planning. When we talk about resilience, first thing, the low-hanging fruit, the cheaper option is to do planning and planning well. So it's important that we spend quite a bit of time on planning. In this presentation, I will spend a couple of minutes talking first about when we talk about resilience, we have multiple challenges. It's not just climate, but it's broader. And it's very important to build that ability to bounce back. Then what are building blocks of resilience? And then again, emphasize this role of integrated planning. And since we are here in India and many of the states are on the coast and it has a very long coastal line, I'm going to go a little bit deeper and show a case of integrated coastal zone management in India. I know that the chair of the session has been also a part of this project before. He has been championing. So I think it's a very important thing to keep in mind, again, as part of resilience planning, also what you can do in the coast. So first question, start here I want to emphasize, okay, nowadays we have multiple crises. We know well all the climate change challenges that we're facing, and we see them in India very often. But there are others, right? The food and nutrition still is a major issue. I mean, globally and in the region, we see that households cannot afford a healthy diet. And there have been these spikes of, food prices all over the world. I think that India has been able to manage better than other countries, but this is a crisis, that needs to be looked at. Of course, there was a global pandemic, and then we're seeing multiple things happening during the pandemic, floods, pandemic, etc. There's issues on trade and finance. There has been inflation over the last couple of years that has been affecting everyone. And there's also, financial crisis come and go. And of course, now we having experienced the high interest rate. It's not the crisis, but it's affecting a lot of the businesses. And that's also a crisis and it's a shock. And then, of course, we see fragility and conflict in many areas. We see, for example, in South Asia, of course, we see fragility at the border between Bangladesh and Myanmar. But that also affects India, because you see some refugees sometimes even coming to India. And then crisis on biodiversity, because globally we have seen declining biodiversity and ecosystems, marine pollution caused by plastics and other aspects. So we have all these things interrelated. Yeah. So when we think about climate resilience, it's not just climate, but also let's keep in mind all the other crises. So we really need to work with the communities to help them to bounce back of these ever escalating and interrelated threats. When we think about resilience also, I'd like to present this is a little bit the framework that we are using for our investments here in India, on coastal particularly, when we have certain building blocks. Yeah. And the first thing before we go into the building blocks is to think about resilience. This is not a static goal, but it's a continuous process, learning by doing and adapting to new circumstances. Of course, you can project, you can forecast, but you don't know exactly what the future is going to be. So it needs to be an adaptable approach. Yeah? And you need to be prepared for those shocks and disasters. And you need to plan for long term. So think about multiple scenarios and plan for that long term. Also, you need to start thinking about cost effectiveness and long lasting resilience. Again, if we think about coastal management, think about to plan for an integrated approach. It's not just enough infrastructure systems, but it's infrastructure combined with nature and to help people to have the environment to have nature. I think a typical example that we see globally is that, the typical planning and management approach for coastal protection is to build embankments, right? You see that in the Netherlands, in Europe, Germany. You see that in Bangladesh, many other places. But what we have learned from many countries, including countries in South Asia, for example, in Bangladesh, is when you build those embankments, and the embankments are very tight, you're protecting in the short term against sea level rise, right? Because you build a wall. But what's going to happen with time? Because this becomes a very tight system, the land inside your polders is going to start going down because there's not influx of water and sediment. So the land is going down, and then also your riverbed is going to be up because there's no sedimentation. So what's happened? You spend a lot of money in infrastructure, and then you start to see every time your land is going down and your river next to the embankment is going up. So you need to continue higher, building higher and higher embankments or seawalls. So that what are the consequences? That becomes very expensive, right? So we start thinking the next generation of coastal protection interventions, we need to think really the integration of nature and how we can use nature to help to build resilience. When I talk people in the Netherlands, they have been building all these dikes for centuries. They already say now we need to start to think about living with water. Instead of thinking about the water keeping away, let's think about living with water, because water brings with sediments, and then you can have systems that you can live better as opposed to protected from that. So this is the new thinking we need to have as we start thinking about your next generation of resilience planning. Then when we look at building blocks, probably the first and most important and the lowest hanging fruit looks at institutions. When you talk about resilience, you talk about multiple sectors. So you need to have the governance to get all those sectors working together. And that's very complex. And in countries like India, is multiple sectors, and you also have different levels of government. You have the center, you have the state, so how they can work better. You need to look at an integrated approach for planning. It's complex, but needs to happen. You need to have the governance in place and the system for coordination. And then it comes the other aspects of resilience. Natural capital, I was saying, let's use your natural capital for the protection against disaster. Ecosystem-based adaptation and so on, nature-based solutions. We talk about that over the land. We have been talking about it for a long time. Now we need to get more operational. Then yes, of course, your infrastructure needs to be more resilient, but you need to bring also your early warning system. You need to get your roads better prepared. And then always the resilience of your economy. You need to start diversification of the economy is one of the best measures for building resilience, right? So think about promoting, advancing green jobs. There's also blue and more inclusive jobs. Blue relate to the management of blue assets like mangroves and so on. Yep. So these are some of the building blocks that we have. So when we say, again, integrated planning for resilience, we always look at why we're doing this, where do we do, with who are the champions. Again, we do this integrated planning for reducing vulnerability of our communities to avoid locking in impacts. I mean, that was the case of Kigali that I showed at the beginning. Lack of planning, you destroy your wetland, then you lock in your infrastructure around the wetland, and then you have problems that you need to fix in the future and become very expensive. Or this case in Ecuador, you just build the wrong road in the wrong place, that you get locking a lot of impacts for the future. Yeah. So evaluate also those risks using long-term planning horizons. Integrated planning for resilience needs to be done on different levels. It needs to be done in cities, coastal areas, settlements, landscape level. And we always need those champions. In case of urban resilience, we talk about city leaders, but sometimes you need regulatory agencies to champion, coastal zone authorities, but then also, of course, the communities who are the beneficiaries and businesses who are the ones that are going to be investing in the long term. This is a bit more complex slide, but I just want to say a little bit, mention that I think we have been applying these concepts for integrated coastal management. There was a project that in the World Bank, we financed a project started like 15 years ago. Now we have a new project, a new program on integrated coastal management. And that's where we are really bringing all those nature-based solutions and this strategic and cost-effective planning. We look at the costs. When we look at the costs, we focus on resilience of the people, resilience of the natural systems, and the resilience of the infrastructure. Here's a little bit some of the interventions that we are recommending. And then our planning exercise needs to cover these aspects. And we, again, as I mentioned, emphasis on that coastal ecological conservation. I think now in the coast, those are the ecosystems. We have the mangroves, seagrasses, we have sand dunes, we have many ecosystems that can help us to build that resilience. We can have coastal forests that give us a coastal protection. And then once we do that, we can also integrate with gray infrastructure when it's needed. It's of course most expensive, but then we can combine. But look at that in the most holistic approach. It's very important to continue with land use regulations. And also, and when we have done that, look at the impacts of residual risk. We can never eliminate all the risks, so you need to be adaptable. So you need to have your shelters, for example, your early warning system. So when a disaster comes, you're better prepared. And you also need to have your financial systems as well, right? Insurance schemes, we are starting to look some loss and damage insurance for fishermen. So these are systems that can also help you build and manage those residual risks. Just some comments on integrated coastal management. Again, I'm just picking one sector. Of course, coastal resilience is also cities. Resilience is also cities, but if you look at the coast, I'm just showing some of the complexities that we see there. We see multiple sectors, multiple policies that come from different sectors that can be contradicted. So it's very important to see how to make them better align, those policies, move away of one sector interventions, and then also institutions are not always well defined. Yeah? So institutional responsibility, there might be overlapping roles. So also look at that very carefully, how to have a consistent institutional arrangement for building resilience. And then diversity, the diversity of stakeholders. Ultimately, there will be, in most cases, you're going to find win-win, but you will also be facing some trade-offs. So how are you going to manage some trade-offs between a certain development proposals, but then also others that are more focused on conservation? Here's some of the expected outcomes that you can get through proper planning of integrated costs. And that's going to help us to find the areas for conservation, areas for development, priority intervention zones where you're going to protect, and then where are you going to be your economic zones. So that spatial analysis is very important and comes from that process. But then also how it's going to be enabled. And this will be enabled through policy and regulations, to action plans, but also capacity building and workshops. And then who's going to be implemented? Again, these are the different authorities at different levels that have the responsibilities. And then there will be the beneficiaries, which are the community, NGOs, individual, private sector, and so on. So this is just a brief summary of how we see a little bit the resilience at the macro stage from the World Bank, and that's the way we want to implement some of the projects. This comes from the dialogue with the state and the center as well. So I hope this framework helped a little bit on the discussion. Again, one of the participants of our program is the government of Tamil Nadu. I don't know whether ACS was able to join online, but she can, of course, explain more how we're championing this on the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pons, for your insightful address. On the stage, we have also now Ms. Deernat Nezi, Senior Vice President and Chief Knowledge Officer, Development Alternatives, and Mr. Shubhashish De, Director, Climate Policy and Climate Finance, Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. I request now our esteemed chair of the session, Mr. J.M. Mosker, to please share his remarks and introduce our esteemed panelists. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I think we are more or less on time. We have to finish at 3:30. But I was telling my fellow panelists was that let's keep the presentation short and sweet, maybe 5 minutes each, so that we should get enough time, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, to interact with the audience. The reason why I thought so is that the topic of today's discussion, adaptation, resilience, and all, is one of the, let's say, not the hot topic. What I remember right from beginning is that in climate change, mitigation was the hot topic, then the finance. But this Cinderella of topics is actually the key to welfare and poverty eradication in a developing country like India. So with that, uh, Is Ms. Supriya Sahu going to be with us? Okay. Now, what I promised Pablo is that since I was there when the first ICZMP project of World Bank was framed way back in 2006, Dr. Ghosh also remembers when we started thinking and discussing. So maybe if there are some aspects of the coastal zone thing, I can sort of take care in my intermittent remarks. So let me go straight to the panelists. Uh, she's there. Oh, welcome, uh, Mrs. Sahu. So let's hear Mrs. Sahu on
Thank you, sir.
her
Thank you.
remarks about what Tamil Nadu is doing on ICZMP Phase 2.
Thank you very much, sir. And it is really an honor to be on your panel. Unfortunately, I have not been able to travel because of several important engagements over here, but I would like to thank the World Bank for giving me this opportunity. About the issues that are being raised in this particular panel about the important issues about climate resilience. As the chairperson knows that Tamil Nadu is a coastal state and has one of the longest coastline in India. 1,076 kilometers is the coastline we have, and out of 38 districts that we have in Tamil Nadu, 14 districts are in the coastal zone. So in one sense, it is actually an opportunity. It's a boon, but at the same time, it's a bane because we have so many challenges. So what we are doing now, coming to the quick question as to what Tamil Nadu is doing when it comes to the coastal resilience. Sir, I would like to just mention, many are already aware, but I just quickly want to touch base that we have set up a special purpose vehicle, which is India's first climate company. This is the Tamil Nadu Green Climate Company. And this is only to make sure that the entire action in the climate resilience is synergized and it takes place from one particular place so that we have a coordinated effort at the state level. Now, the Tamil Nadu Green Climate Company has a board, and that board consists of several stakeholders, including several key players from the department, from the government, and that includes the Secretary Environment, Finance, Energy, Transport, Agriculture, and so on. It also has the private sector participation, people who are co-opted as the partners. And I'm very happy to say that we have partnered with, obviously, with the UNEP, with World Bank, with C40, and several other agencies that are working in this particular field, GIZ, and we are also working with several international agencies. Now, this climate company has been able to provide a clear direction and focus to the resilience work. We so far have had three important missions in our state. One important mission is, of course, the climate change mission, which is a state level mission that we have set up. And so what we have been able to do is that under this mission, we have made the district collector as the district head of the mission at the district level. So you have the district, so like flowing from the state, and of course, as a bottoms up approach, we have the collector heading the mission with the DFO, the Pollution Control Board authorities, and the concerned local NGOs and the stakeholders. The mission is responsible for implementing all the climate initiatives, including the bioshield, capacity building of the people, reaching out to communities, pollution control at the district level. The second mission that we have is the mission which is greening the state, which is basically a massive afforestation exercise. And we aim to enhance our greening efforts, I mean the green cover, from the current percentage of 23.7% to 33% in the next 9 years. And that entails that it should be a people's movement where we work with every possible entity to reach out to every stakeholder. That's a second mission. The third mission is the mission which is about the rejuvenation of our water bodies. So this is the wetlands mission. And we have taken up the task of rejuvenating 100 water bodies, and more focus will be on the coastal water bodies. And I'm very happy to mention that with the partnership with the World Bank, we have now got the fourth mission, which is the coastal restoration mission for Tamil Nadu, which exclusively focuses on the 14 coastal districts. One of the important components of this particular this initiative or this mission is setting up a blue-green agency, blue-green carbon agency. So as we know that because we are a coastal state and have a very considerable coverage under mangroves, also the incredible biodiversity in the Gulf of Mannar and also seagrass and several other important marine ecosystems. It's very important for us to kind of look at this particular initiative in a comprehensive way. So this agency, which is the Blue Carbon or the Blue Green Carbon Agency, is focused on setting up a kind of a framework, a policy framework, which will be able to map, measure, and engage communities in the measurement of the resources, the blue-green carbon resources. And how do we kind of look at these resources not as a commercial, not from a commercial angle, but as biodiversity resources, so that communities can play an important role in partaking these resources to protect the kind of incredible resources which they are truly custodians of. I would like to stop here, sir. These are, few initial comments that I wanted to make. And as and when you give me an opportunity, I would like to come in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Now, I request Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi, who is Head of Environment, Energy and Resilience of UNDP, to share his thoughts, because already the World Bank presentation has given the direction, but you can veer away from that direction, Doctor.
Thank you, and thank you for the advice, Mr. Mauskar. Of course, I'm delighted to be sort of in a panel chaired by Mr. Mauskar. I started my career in India when he was at the sort of in the climate change division at the Ministry of Environment, and we started thinking about adaptation at that very moment. I think India has actually been doing a lot as a part of the National Action Plan on Climate Change and beyond as well. So I would make very sort of pointed remarks about the three issues. The first one on planning. I think there's a great amount of sort of discussion on how does one start thinking about systematically planning for adaptation. And given the fact that both adaptation and resilience are kind of moving targets, you can't really say that, okay, this is my target and this is where I want to reach. By the time you actually reach there, the target's actually moved already. So therefore, there is a very strong role of science in informing planning. And how does one actually start working very closely with science to start thinking about adaptation planning at the national level and at the subnational level, and of course going down to the very local level. Now we have great examples from this country. Of course, the IITM and the entire sort of meteorological department, the IMD, they do sort of foundational work on these topics. And I think our capacities to start thinking about forecasts and all have already sort of improved, but also long-term modeling, which is anchored in the National Communication Division, with whom we work very closely at UNDP in terms of developing the third national communication, but also the first initial adaptation communication, where we work very closely with GIZ to sort of start thinking about how does science inform adaptation planning, and of course then reporting on adaptation as well. And I think the frontiers moved a little bit over the last few years, but we still need much more granular sort of modeling data, but also things which inform implementation in systematic ways. So how does science inform adaptation activities on the ground? There have been some efforts. The National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change implemented several projects, and UNDP is working in the coastal communities as well. So we implement a large Green Climate Fund project, which is working in 3 states, where some of the work that sort of Pablo presented is, of course, mirrored. But there are other issues, like, for instance, some of the issues around safeguards, social and environmental safeguards when you start implementing projects on the ground. Like, even if you're planting mangroves, how do you start thinking about social safeguards for the communities which are living around the mangroves? What about sort of environmental safeguards, even for environmentally green green projects? So I think those are issues that we need to think about much more systematically. The second piece in terms of institutional frameworks. So whenever you start thinking about resilience and adaptation at the same time, when I started working in this country, there were like two institutional lines that you had to follow. One was the National Action Plan on Climate Change, the State Action Plan on Climate Change, and of course, the work which was being done by the state departments of environment. And the other institutional logic is the disaster management logic. So you have the National Disaster Management Authority, you have the state disaster management authorities, and of course, there is huge amounts of resourcing available in one and not as much in the other. And how do they speak to each other? And I think this is where lots of interesting interactions are possible and are happening. And I'm glad that sort of we're also at the sort of intersection of these conversations, for instance, which are also being triggered now by conversations around loss and damage due to climate change, where NDMA and Ministry of Environment work very closely, but now state departments of environment who have huge amounts of resources because of the 15th Finance Commission are also thinking about databases which look at past losses and future potential damages because of climate change as well. So that institutional arrangement of looking at these different institutional logics, and given the fact that, well, adaptation and resilience are multi-stakeholder, partner sort of issues, of course, they're completely interministerial as well. So even if you go beyond these two sort of institutional logics that I mentioned, there are massive other programs like the Rural Employment Guarantee Program, like the Fasal Bima Yojana, like the Krishi Sinchai Yojana, which are all trying to sort of are geared towards enhancing resilience and strengthening capacities and adaptive capacity, but not necessarily presented as such or kind of not a part of the larger debate on sort of resilience and so on. So finally, on the capacities and participation, I'd like to give just one very sort of basic example of our work in Odisha. So we are working in around 3 different landscapes in Odisha on our coastal resilience program, and of course, it's a green climate fund project. So the logic is, of course, that the national ministry, the focal ministry is the Ministry of Environment. You have state project sort of department directors who are of the government. But how do you sort of foster participation beyond just state ownership? So, of course, at the forest, there are forest officials who are involved at the district level, so the DFOs. But it's very interesting that the state government has chosen to work very closely with facilitating NGOs to foster even more sort of stronger community partnership and community engagement. And even those facilitating NGOs have now identified climate champions at the level of every village. So there are now 400 women climate champions who've been identified who actually facilitate the implementation and ensure the social and environmental safeguards that I had referred to earlier. And I think this is where we really need to start thinking about broad-basing capacity and starting to think about sort of ownership and safeguards in creative ways. I would pause here, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. We have with us, through pure happenstance, Dr. Christoph von Stechow, who is the Senior Policy Advisor in the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. I remember with GIZ, their Indian setup, we had a number of successful projects. I was dealing with them when I was chairman of Central Pollution Control Board, then also dealing with climate change. So it will be interesting that the world has changed a lot in the last 16 years. It's not where we were. In some ways, I think better, some ways not so better. So, Doctor, what are your views? How can Germany and India sort of make the Cinderella of adaptation favorite princess?
Thank you, Mr. Mosca. Yeah, welcome everybody, and thanks for the presentation so far. Basically, you've mentioned most points that I wanted to speak about anyway, which is maybe not a big of a wonder because I understand that World Bank, GSF, and UNDP are very closely working together along with KfW. Just for those who are not particularly familiar with the German Indo-German Development Cooperation, maybe something worth mentioning is that last year we concluded the
sorry, Green and Sustainable Development Partnership was signed by Honorable Prime Minister Modi and my Chancellor to collaborate further and enhance action towards SDGs and the Paris goals. And I think that partly answers already your questions. We have, I think, moved a long way from more of an environmental focus and different other programs towards really looking at development cooperation as a way to deal with climate change and especially with climate change impacts. So you mentioned earlier, adaptation and resilience is not a hot topic. I don't think this would apply anymore to our cooperation with India, because we've worked with nature and for the people for quite some time, and because we're just convinced that climate change is not changing the world to the better at all, and it really affects prospects and productivity, particularly of the most vulnerable. And that's where our perspective as development cooperation ministry comes into play, where our imperative for the Indo-German cooperation really is to build resilience for the benefit of those who are most at risk. So very similar to the World Bank building blocks that we've seen earlier, we also apply a comprehensive risk management in guiding what we decided in Berlin or Bonn on what projects and what programs KfW and GIZ can be working on, including other agencies in India especially. And one that for us, it includes all of the aspects that have been already mentioned, like working on risk assessment, working on resilient infrastructure in cities, including nature-based solutions lately, and sustainable natural resource management and climate risk management, the things that I'm responsible for on the desk. But as I said earlier, I don't want to share so many insights on integrated coastal management, zone management, because we've heard so much about it, but also want to share with you some insights from the project I recently visited in both Himachal Pradesh in Kangar district and also Anantapur district in Andhra Pradesh. And it may, as you realize, those are not coastal areas so much, at least not where I was visiting. But for me, I think this was an eye-opener for a couple of reasons, in that we can use nature also in the rural areas to understand how we can improve livelihoods and improve employment opportunities for the people that are already really facing really harsh the consequences of climate change. So one of the ingredients, I think, for good practices that we've seen is that we want to harness available data from all sorts of sources, not just from singular departments, also from science, and trying to integrate them to the local level and make sure people can use them where they need it most. And that is not only like, for example, working with GIS data with a particular department, but also making sure different agencies, Indian, international agencies, work together to make sure that on the ground people can really move forward and can decide for themselves what is best to improve their livelihood and understand and own what they do. The second thing which struck me was that the ownership, as I just said, is so important. And maybe something which was really an eye-opener for me was a forest department officer who said the project that was in Himachal, the project based on microplanning and village societies working together with different agencies, what it did to the community was that it shifted their mindset. The forest area that they looked over wasn't anymore the forest department area. It was their forest, and they tried to take care of it because it was building on the idea that that they own their resources and they need to take care of them in a manner that is also uses the social institutions that are there and enhances social cohesion while improving climate resilience and livelihoods at the same time. Maybe the third point I want to mention is that especially when we look at agriculture and the huge challenges for nutrition security, there's not just new scientific evidence we have to improve planning, as Ashish said, but also we can use and build on traditional knowledge, because there are so many people that know their landscapes better than we do, especially me being based in Berlin. I wouldn't know what is best for the people on the ground, but they know the land of their ancestors, and they can take up some of the traditional knowledge and link it with new evidence from science. And I think there are so many opportunities because we see so many people unemployed or with little opportunities for wage earning, and at the same time increasingly more land falls fallow because the productivity isn't there anymore. So what we've seen in visiting the Indo-German Global Academy for Agroecology Research and Learning was that promoting those traditional natural farming approaches, but at the same time igniting and capacitating the people on the ground, for example, together with the self-help women's self-help group movement, and using the extension system that is already there, can really infiltrate this curiosity about how to improve natural farming so that it really looks at the current challenges and the future challenges. And it not only deals with the biggest issues that the different villages face, but it also deals with biodiversity challenges at the same time. It increases soil carbon. And so I think there can be many solutions with linking to what people already know and they can relate to and add a bit of new scientific evidence into the system. I'll stop here and come back later to some questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Now we have Mrs. Zinat Niazi, who is Senior Vice President, but what I found more interesting is the Chief Knowledge Officer of Development Alternatives. Madam, your NGO, I'm again familiar with your NGO for quite some time, has been pushing its model of development and what alternatives are there for government policies and whatever. Now, you saw the presentation from World Bank. So do you have any alternative or do you think it is it?
I think there are alternatives, Subhaska, for everything, but I don't think we have one-fit-all solutions in any case. Yeah, so a lot of what we saw in we heard in the first presentation. I mean, and of course what Ashish and Suja has been talking about. There are various ways of looking at it, and one of the things that I think I'm picking up from them and things that we have seen on the ground and also implemented and seeing more and more of, I think now is the whole integration of the knowledge system. So when we talk about science and we talk about traditional knowledge, or we talk about how this information and data is going to flow into the system, how it will get integrated, and I think where one very interesting alternative that is coming up is citizen science-based system. So how do we get local knowledge which is robust enough, credible enough? Because a lot of the times, the question of robustness and credibility of local data and locally sourced, sometimes even crowdsourced data, and crowdsourced data is becoming more and more useful, has been questioned. But mechanisms of citizen science integrated with, GIS-based systems, ground truthing, and regular and traditional data sourcing are now very, very sort of in many places being used, especially for wetland management, for example, or for agriculture spaces, and we've seen that in small experiments in Maharashtra with WOTR, where they've tried to integrate everything. Our own work in Udaipur has been doing that. So we see a very interesting possibility, and for that, in my view, and all, what we need to look at within the government system as alternatives is our robust MEL mechanisms. I think what we have not seen for very often is how monitoring evaluation then focuses on learning to bring back into the planning spaces, and that can only happen if there is this integration of knowledge systems that we see, and integration of data systems. So I think that is one. It's not really an alternative, but a different way of looking at how planning for resilience will happen. The second point that I wanted really to make, and before I will stop with this, is how we can use this mechanism to have much better community engagement. Community engagement that would be not just, and there is where I differ from the model that the World Bank presentation did, is not two distinct boxes of government and community. When you reach the implementation level, it's not a top down in that sense, because you need to have community engagement right from the design and planning to feel that ownership, and all the way through to the continuous adaptive sort of response to what is happening. If we look at it from a city infrastructure space, for example, how would you do that when you are looking at drain management, in a city, or you're looking at city forest management? How do you look at that? And so I think there again, citizen science and mechanisms, platforms where citizens and governments, local governments can come together, become really important. Maybe I'll stop at that, and we can come at it.
Thank you, ma'am. We have Mr. Subhashish Day. He is Director Climate Policy and Climate Finance of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. So, again, going back to the Cinderella syndrome, I mean, we are really blessed that people handling finance and energy have strayed here, isn't it? Subhashish, from to such unglamorous topics. But then I would also be interested to know, interesting to know from him, how does, in your worldview of your organization, how have you come here for adaptation, and is it due to World Bank, or is the subject becoming important for you also?
First of all, I would like to thank TERI for inviting me for this important session, and Chairman Sir, Mr. Mauskar, former Special Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change, Ms. Supriya Sahu, Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Tamil Nadu, fellow panelists and esteemed delegates. Now, what Shakti as an organization does is that we try to drive in the systems approach and build coherent narrative within the civil society ecosystem. And that is what, again, I'll try to do in next 5 minutes of time. And we'll start with throwing a question with a show of hands to the delegates who are present here. There is a tornado in Texas. There is a cyclone in Odisha. And a villager in Odisha, a villager in Texas is affected. Just give me a show of hand who thinks that the villager in Odisha has a better ability to become resilient to what has happened in Odisha vis-a-vis what has happened in Texas. Show of hand. So most of us feel that someone in Texas has a better ability of resilience. Odisha has a better ability to resilient. Okay, so tell me why. And why the villager in Texas has a lower ability to bounce back? Okay, you sir?
Somehow and the kind of losses which is suffered by a person in terms of the more third kind of losses, probably a villager in fact Orissa will have a less amount of impact financial impact. Second, within the environment, at least the person from Orissa can survive for a few days. A person from in fact Texas will find it very difficult because within standard of Texas. These are two reasons why in fact a person who is based on Orissa has got better chance of surviving than a person who is Texas. But other question is that why in fact because they are covered by the social security special. They might be able to survive.
Okay, great. Now, the next follow-up thought, which I like to leave with all of you. Now we are talking about loss and damage fund, and we are asking the global north to pour in more money into the loss and damage fund because developing economies like us do not have the capability. But if we hear from what we are hearing from this room here and the people, the learned people who are present here, then the loss and damage fund should go to US. Why should they give it to India, where the impact is lower than someone who is sitting in Texas and uh, facing the same music or similar music? No, they are not. They are not giving the money in the first place, and that's can be the argument there. I'm just yeah. So that's what I'm saying. That what we do in all this deliberation is to throw ideas and thoughts, and then try to help all of us understand and evolve in our thought process that what we are really driving at. The minimal point, and taking your example of social security, the social security is a function of what? Function of the revenue which the country generates, the government generates, the people of the country generates. So it again is a function of the wealth which is created. To my mind, it's very critical and important and something which has gone out of the fancy of the global economy where we used to talk maybe 10, 15 years back on wealth creation. Wealth creation is critical and important aspect if you are trying to adapt ourselves to severe events, whether it's climate or elsewhere, even for COVID, like scenarios. At the same time, creating that kind of ability for the system to bounce back. Now, when we talk about wealth creation, the wealth can be created by the nomenclature which has been followed by global north or even China, where we have not been able to delink energy uses with emission. But for us, it becomes critical for to delink emission from energy uses. Energy will invariably going to use more and more going forward, but how do we delink it? Now, just a parting thought here, and it's come from a research work which I recently read, where a group of US-based scientists have come up with a credible research work which states that in places which is warmer and drier, the photo respiration of plants is double. What it means that you understand that there is a photosynthesis through which carbon is absorbed. There is a respiration process through which the carbon dioxide is also emitted from plants. The plants will emit double the amount of carbon dioxide which they otherwise would have done if the temperature increases and the availability of water in the soil reduces. So from that perspective, we need to then start delinking the emission from energy uses, and that should be the development model which requires for generation of wealth. And without having the wealth on the table, it would be very difficult to create the kind of resilience and mechanisms at scale what we are talking about. So pilot scale, wonderful. At large scale, to me, it would be difficult if you do not have the money on the table. I'll pause here.
Subhashish, since you're asking everybody, I could raise my hand. One reason why, when you're comparing Texas with Odisha, the existing climate variability in India is about 8 to 10 times more because it is monsoon controlled than the continental regions of Europe or America. Now, a person who is acclimatized to Indian climate is, to my mind, a number of times more acclimatized or rather prepared or resilient than a person in a stable climate. Anyway, uh, I'll give you the last word, and so that, yeah, no, I said I'll give you the last word. Before that, Manish will give his technical inputs. Manish, 5 minutes.
Uh, Thank you, sir. Um, as you had said in the beginning that you would want more discussion. So I think I'll you know, try to get in that mode. And I want to reflect on very first slide that Pablo had shown, and the picture from Kigali, and this description that came with that picture, uh, that a wetland was being used for something else. So it was a wrong planning, and some alternative planning is now being introduced. Now I'm just thinking, why in the first place people were using that place for something else which we say they should not have been using it? Would it be reasonable to assume that they were probably adapting to some other vulnerability by using the wetland for the purposes that it was not supposed to be? If that is the case, and which I believe that in many cases the vulnerable groups often are always in a situation of continuous adaptation to some or other vulnerabilities, therefore they probably were doing the right planning within their constraints, within their capabilities. And so the limited point that I'm trying to probably pose here is that we need to think about planning with an open mind, that what is it that we are trying to plan and for what purposes. Is it possible that the kind of uh, 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 adaptation or resilience measures that we introduce, they end up making people vulnerable to things that had led them to do things in a different way which we think were not the right way? So that kind of scenario, I think, has to be always thought about while we think about planning. For example, I'm reminded of one example of the flood management response in Pune that you had given me last year when I had met you. That something, it was a uh, uh, the intervention became kind of a vulnerability driver or a different stressor. But what I liked about that statement was that using for something else. I think that something else can be used as a keyword. What if we, and that's a very wild thought, what if we begin to see mitigation projects which are by and large aligned with the development and growth strategies as an instrument of adaptation? For example, I know Shakti and DA have been working with the brick industry in Bihar. Our social transformation team at TERI has been working with service providers in power sector. Uh, the, these are projects which are primarily planned with a mitigation orientation, but there is a possibility that where these kind of projects, say for example, projects under Kusum scheme, the solar plants, which are converting agricultural land as solar plants. What if we begin to think about these projects in terms of they also being vehicle of helping the specifically targeted vulnerable communities in those areas? I say this because one of my students is doing field work on Kusum projects, and it seems that the SDG impacts, which are more aligned with adaptation and resilience, are really not there, whereas there is great possibility and potential that can be done in through the institutional measures and better planning. So mitigation projects being used for something else here being adaptation and resilience. Thank you.
Shelley, last. Okay. Uh, Friends, we are lucky to have Dr. Pradipta Ghosh with us. Sir, would you like to say something on the World Bank presentation? Because World Bank is not what it used to be in 2007, 2008. Otherwise, Green Climate Fund would be a different creature. So I wonder. That's my question to you.
This was a very comprehensive presentation by the World Bank. And it covered the bases. But I think Zenith had a point that, perhaps, you should not really segregate the governmental sector from the non-governmental sector, in adaptation planning and, more importantly, in adaptation implementation. So that is something that, you might like to give some thought to. And, your presentation, of course, was very general. It covered, if you could apply these principles and this kind of, cutting the cake, in any particular scenario. But I would have hoped for at least a couple of slides in which you spoke of the specific Indian institutional challenges, with respect to institutional challenges and the institutional strengths with respect to adaptation. And also the fact that in India, a few years ago, one of our mutual colleagues, Rajeshri Ray, she had done an inventarization of the central government budget, which goes into programs which have adaptation to extreme events as one identified component. And what she came up with is that actually our expenditure on adaptation was greater than our defense expenditure. And I think this study has also been updated a few years ago, and that same conclusion holds. So the point is that, India can certainly do with greater strengthening, but India also has considerable experience with adaptation long before, it became a focus, through climate change. And I think, that if I can just venture a response to this question about Odisha, I think the response he got from the audience was not what he was expecting. So I think he was taken a bit off guard. But I remember that in the 1970s, there was a super cyclone in Odisha. And close to 250,000 people lost their lives. Now that's many orders of magnitude higher than what you would expect in Texas. But we had one just a couple of years ago of the same scale, in which less than 20 people died. And most of those people who died were those who'd come out to watch the show. Okay. Now, the reason is that this massive Indian expenditures on adaptation have been spent very efficiently. And what was done in Odisha, as has been done in many other coastal states, is early warning systems, are cyclone shelters, which are essentially schools which are, built for dual purposes, and and there are sort of other, and there is a disaster management agency, central disaster management agency, which has built up huge capacity over many years. So these are all the factors which have gone into the India's responses to adaptation. So I think we can also take care of we can also note that these strengths exist, but the fact that these strengths exist does not mean that there is no damage due to climate change extreme events, and that India is a deserving recipient of funds from the loss and damage fund. Maybe there are other countries like Philippines which have a higher priority. But yes, I mean, India certainly also has, does have, significant loss and damage experiences, over the years.
Friends, my endeavor was to about have 20 minutes for question answer, but anyway, we have about 13 minutes. So it's partially successful. So what we'll do is we'll take 2-3 questions at a time. So when you're asking the question, you can just introduce who you are. And rather than giving the comments, ask the question sharp and to who do you want to answer the question. Otherwise, then if you are not sure, then we'll choose amongst ourselves. But before that, can we get Mrs. Sahu on the screen? Because I had a question for her, if the time permits.
Till then, if we can.
Yeah, we'll go.
Yeah, I'll just try to.
No, that's okay. Let's ask questions, anybody? Or no questions? Okay. Two ladies in the back.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I work with a German NGO in the beautiful kingdom of Bhutan, which is a carbon negative country. And my question goes more or less to the whole panel. How do you convince people on the ground who live in a carbon negative country, who are highly affected by climate change, but have super cheap resources to water and energy, to change their way into more climate resilient, for example, farming methods, or in general, to change their whole way of lifestyle into being more climate resilient or adapt more when they are already carbon negative and when all their resources, in case of energy, are too cheap?
Next question.
Hello, I'm Rishika Rajkumar. I'm a student from TERI School of Advanced Studies. And my question was for Ms. Zenith. So you talked about integration of traditional knowledge and science. And I think that's something that needs to happen more and more. The only places where I've seen both of them being talked about in the same space is certain conferences where it's talked about and people listen. And there perhaps is learning happening. But I wanted to understand what are the contexts in which there is openness enough to take that forward as action. And who are the people listening to this to be able to take that action? That is my question.
So the first question.
Very interesting question on Bhutan. And fortunately, I had experience of working in Bhutan extensively in my previous Abdar. In 2015, when I was working with Bhutan government, helping them develop their energy transition strategy, and all of this was part of that. Now, what happens in Bhutan, to my mind, would be difficult to replicate in other large democracies. One being, I'll just give you an example. In 2015, there was a currency-related deficit in Bhutan, and for that, availability of petroleum products was a difficulty. They buy petrol from India. They were not in a position to do that. So what they did for 2 years, they banned purchase of new vehicles in Bhutan. Similar kind of instances had been there, how they have managed their tourism. It's an expensive tourism proposition for Bhutan. You cannot just walk in. Even for Indians, you have to pay a sustenance fee if you are traveling to Bhutan to do a tourism. So those are things possible for a landlocked country with 6 lakhs population 600,000 population. Might not be a model which can be directly replicated. But after having said that, there are areas within, even in India or other countries, where at a specific area-based model can be developed. For example, India's Ladakh can be a great follower of what happened in Bhutan. Those has to be taken at a state-specific, area-specific, location-specific initiative might not be applicable across the country. Now, what Pradipta sir has already said, and actually I was not looking at the answer, and that's what from the audience was that we are somehow obsessed about looking at how much loss of life has happened. And I fully agree that the losses of life which happens because of super cyclones 30 years back and vis-a-vis now are much lower. But what is about the losses which happens to the economy, which happens to a villager's house, how it is built? Someone saying staying in Texas, his house is in all likelihood insured. He can build it with the insurance money. For a villager in India, what happens to it? Some money comes from the government coffer, but we are a deficit economy, and we know how the loss and damage related or this kind of fund is distributed. So from that perspective, again, coming back to the same story, that keeping some nuances for everyone to think about, that we need to move beyond the way we have been thinking of planning process. It's not that India has not really planned about disaster management in past. The examples in the coastal places is a great example, but how more and more, even not using the words of say climate resilience or something fancy like that, how do we start integrating better planning process? We have great examples, large scale examples which has happened in past. How start replicating those going forward?
Let me try. It's a very valid point. Where really are safe spaces of this nature institutionally sort of mandated or facilitated, where the amalgamation of knowledge can happen and inform, and when built into a learning system that informs planning and action. Very difficult within our institutional mechanism, because somehow the way our institutions have developed, there is a provider and a designer and a planner of a government, and there is a receiver of everything that is to be done by the community, and therefore there's a hierarchy, and the knowledge that the provider provides is scientifically validated or verified, and the knowledge that the receiver has is not valued adequately. But having said that, we do have examples, and not only examples of I would say islands of examples that civil society has been tried, because civil society is a great place for experimentation and doing pilots. And there have been spaces of this nature. I mean, our own work in Bundelkhand, where the radio has been a platform to bring policy, to bring community, to bring scientific expertise together, and use that for local area, decision making on watershed, on cropping, on livelihoods, and all of that kind of stuff. But if you look at it, not from here, but at the state level, I think one of the emerging examples, it's 10 years in the making, so one shouldn't call it emerging, but it's something that was, I'd say, India's best kept secret. That is what we heard is Odisha, where structural changes have been made in the way they handle procurement of services, for example, where community-led services have a pride of place. So you suddenly have community groups who are on the table, in that sense, discussing on what they can provide and how they can provide, and they are actually leading local planning exercises. So the government has set in place a mechanism through change in their rules and regulations, which is, I think, a very important way to.
Don't mind, I have a question for Mrs. Sahu, our additional CS from Tamil Nadu. Madam, urban local bodies and Panchayati Raj institutions are a creature of constitution after the 43rd and 44th amendment. Now, in the structure for coastal zone management, in the structure for climate action, how these are taken on board? Because you said that the collector is the chairman of the district level committee, but collector and the district is not a constitution entity. The entity, constitution entity is the state and the urban local bodies and Panchayati Raj. So I thought that would be an important Indian, let's say, Indian twist to the tale. which you could answer, what the state government is thinking about it.
You're absolutely right, sir. And what we are trying to do here in the state of Tamil Nadu is that we are also working on the village level institutions to strengthen them when it comes to the climate resilience. So we have a comprehensive program where we are involving the village panchayat leaders and the village community in something called as the climate resilient villages or the climate smart villages program that we have. In this year, we have chosen 11 villages in our state from the different geographies, many of them in the coastal areas, one or two are in the hill areas, and other central part of Tamil Nadu, where we are working with the local community very closely to see to it whether they can actually be involved in the measuring, reporting, and verification, which is the MRVs, as we are talking about, of the various parameters at the village level. So I'll just to for a better understanding, I wanted to give an example. So we have a village here, basically in Kadalur district, which is called Pichavaram. It's also very famous for its large tracts of mangroves. And so the question arises here that while we are talking at such big policies at the state level and district levels, what is the role that the local communities and, as you rightly said, the constitutional entities are playing? Here, sir, the panchayat is now working with us very closely to understand, to develop an online format. And I'm very happy to share here that a dashboard has been developed by the community with the participation of the community, which actually measures the quality of water, the brackish water, whether there are any pollutants in it, what exactly is the TDS of water, and how the water quality is changing over a period of time. Because the quality of water is absolutely essential for survival of mangroves. And it is going to determine what exactly the community is kind of going to get by the measuring the entire system. So to simplify the jargons, to demystify the climate, vocabulary that we use, that is the mission that we are on. And therefore, to kind of make sure that they understand in the language, which in fact which makes it much more better for them to participate. So a system is being developed in every different, in these 11 villages, to kind of make them participate, measure, report, and verify. And then that comes back to the policy decision at the district level and at the state level. I like to stop here, sir.
Well, I think now, okay, last question.
Namaskar, Jule. My question is from Dr. Pablo and Zeenat ma'am. So I have been working on the concept of eco-model village in Ladakh, very similar to Bhutan. We vertically integrate organic farming and solar technology for uplifting indigenous tribal women farmers. And back in 2019, I had a meeting with the gentleman in World Bank in the US. And I was doing my fellowship at Yale at the time. And they said that the World Bank is actively developing a policy for eco-model villages and sustainability. However, in India, I haven't seen any positions or proposals to apply for. So is there a way in which we can apply for it? Because there have been some significant results. So far, we've partnered with the Indian government, MOEFCC, and Department of Science and Technology to build 8 eco-villages where livelihoods have been enhanced by 33% on ground.
I think you can discuss it separately.
Yes. No, but is there any policy? I would like to know.
It is a different kind of question.
With
I
the
don't know.
World
Would you like to answer here or would you like to discuss separately?
Yeah, I was mentioning together with the government of Tamil Nadu as part of the short program of the financial program, is going to be the green coastal villages component, right? That we are going to innovate, and of course, the government has been championing that. So that's maybe Madame would like to explain something more on this.
Christoph wanted to have
Coastal
say something
villages,
quick.
Yeah, I didn't want to do the last one, but just coming back to your question on the local ground. and trying to integrate knowledge. I think while I do not share the optimism about losses and damages that will occur to people in India and across the world, because there will be hazards unknown to people to the degree we've seen so far, which is why Germany and other countries have chipped into the loss and damage fund. I also see optimism when I looked at the local level, how much innovation there is. Like, for example, pharma scientists being now, coming up this global academy for agriculture, agroecology, or looking at new planning tools at Gram Panchayat level, like risk-informed Gram Panchayat development plans. And also the eco-village approach has been used here in at least by GIZ. I cannot tell you exactly about the government plans about it. But I think there's so many things at local level where people really know what they're facing. Of course, should be given more data, more coherent data by the public space. And I think so. I think I'm also encouraged not by the local innovations, but also by the plan of the government of India to really develop a national adaptation plan and kickstart the process, informed by the outcome already published. And we hope that we can support that process so that these two sides really talk together, local and national. Thanks.
Well, I feel somewhat like Rip Van Winkle after having suddenly turned up after 6 years of the Paris Agreement to see what's the state of play like in WSDS. But I was intrigued, and now after hearing Pablo, I am a bit, or rather, I am rather enthusiastic that World Bank has really recognized that climate change is an issue which they're meant to tackle. And said it before that GCF would not even what it is. And it's a big failure. If World Bank and the Bretton Woods institutions had gone the other way. Having said that, see, adaptation is basically local. That's why I asked the Additional Chief Secretary about the role of urban local bodies in Panchayat. You can't decide on adaptation plans and adaptation actions, even sitting at the state headquarters, not even at the district headquarters. The districts as large as they are in India, 50 kilometers by 50 kilometers. So how do you involve in using the word community is easy, but it has to be done in a manner which is appropriate for the country. I mean, we have constitutional recognition to panchayats and urban local bodies. Other countries may not have it. So a system in India which talks of community but not of panchayats as institution or urban local body as institution will fall somewhere. But anyway, to my mind, the purpose of these kind of interactions is not that suddenly we'll get a flash of light and everything will be clear to us. Actually, everything may turn out to be a bit more confused than when you enter the room. But if you think about it, and I'm sure TERI would be, uploading the presentation and making some summary of discussions and all, it gives you food for thought so that when you come back for World Sustainable Development Summit 2025, maybe TERI would be able to further sort of refine, and World Bank would have been naturally, Dr. Ghosh had given suggestions and some friends here also, would be able to refine their approach. And we may even see the ICZMP phase 2 being approved in the meantime and getting into action. So with that fond hope, thank you very much.
A sincere thanks to all our esteemed speakers for their valuable contributions. Now I invite Dr. Shelley Kedia to give the vote of thanks. Thank you.
So, firstly, thanks to our partners, the World Bank, who has made possible this insightful discussions, and all the panelists present here, and all of you who have contributed to the discussions. On the question of planning, I'd just like to end by sharing and policy or planning innovation, which we in TERI have developed. It's called green budgeting, which also enables, by the way, adaptation planning. Because one of the rationales for us as an entry point is that when we talk about state action plan on climate change, some of the states are just revising it after as long as 10 years. But budgets are a process which happen every year. And so if we use budgets as an entry point to also strengthen planning, of course, also including adaptation planning, that will be important. And finally, just also wanted to mention that an outcome of COP28 finally was the global goal on adaptation. And we have a 2-year process lined ahead. Planning is an integral part of it. So as we go on and develop metrics for that particular process, discussions like this, I'm sure, will contribute to that process as well. So with this, we thank, I would, on behalf of TERI and the entire organizing team, I'd like to thank everyone.
Before we conclude this session, I'd like to invite our esteemed speakers for a group photograph. A group photograph. Please, can you? We request the audience to please be seated with us for another insightful track, systematic track, that's going to start at 4 p.m. Thank you.